Welcome. I'm here today with Beth Christiano, and she is a clinical psychologist and also a yoga therapist. She's also a graduate of the Breathing Deeply Yoga Therapy School, so that's exciting. And we're here today to talk about grief and loss. So glad we could do this, Beth. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Brandt.
I wanted to have you on because you've had so much experience with people as a psychologist, and now you're integrating yoga therapy with that work. And I think when people think about grief and loss, they think about a lot of different things. But one of the things they might not say to themselves is, I should go find a yoga therapist. So we're here to see how that might benefit people. So I was wondering, I know you have a lot to say on the subject, but maybe we could just start a little bit about with what made you even interested in this subject in particular versus all the other interesting mental health things that people could be experiencing.
Sure. My own mental health journey as a psychologist and also as a client, somebody who's been in therapy a lot, both as part of my training program and outside my training program. I have reckoned with my own history of loss in a way now that 20 years ago I didn't. And so I'm recognizing the value for myself of doing that work. And I know it is of value to other people by virtue of the fact that we all experience loss and grief. And yet somehow it's a topic that flies under the radar that we don't usually talk about. So from my personal history, that's been the case. I also started out my career as a clinical psychologist in pediatric psychology, and I worked in hematology oncology. And I was young and didn't have the experiences under my belt and didn't have the personal work under my belt. But yet it was a daily experience of seeing people and helping people navigate grief and loss. Yeah. So it's been there all along. And it's really been through my training as a yoga teacher and my training as a yoga therapist that I found a way to understand my own grief and loss and other people's in I think, a more holistic way that's been very helpful. So that's been within the past 10 years.
So you've got this sort of new perspective in a way on tools people can use. Would you say that's true?
A new perspective on tools, on tools people can use, and a new perspective on how significant a topic this is and how we can approach it through using a number of lenses.
I definitely agree with that. I had my own experience as a yoga therapist where I didn't get into yoga therapy thinking grief and loss is going to be my reason for doing this. And then, of course, so much grief and so much loss. And I found myself anyway, like forced in a good way to really look at this topic and think about what do people actually experience and in what ways does all this yoga therapy stuff, could it help? And the part you just said that's so interesting is that it's not really talked about. It's like I went through a whole training without the words grief and loss being used. Even we talked a little bit about death and other things, but considering it's a subject that every single human interacts with, it's amazing how little we talk about.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting point. We talk about the event, but we don't really talk about the emotion, the change over time, and even the growth over time, right? Like the potential for not really healing, but the potential for growth and healing.
Yeah. And the other thing we don't talk about is the kind of levels in us that these things affect. When it is talked about, it's like you're sad or you're grieving. It's like a general word, but we don't talk so much about people have bodies and they're affected, and people have like different aspects of themselves that are affected, all the way into you can be more ill from your grief and loss process if it's not going well. And yeah, it's a big problem. So, what led you to thinking about yoga therapy and this subject in particular? Like, what do you think yoga therapy brings to the conversation and the tool set for people?
And it's really an extension of what you just said. Through the yoga therapy lens, we see people, each individual, and each individual's experience as being multifaceted. So there's a way to understand who we are as human beings that has multiple dimensions. So we are bodies, we are energy, we are our mind, we are our intuition, we are the deepest part of ourselves that connects with divinity and other people and nature. And all of these things are affected by any number of experiences, loss being one of them, and
Mm.
the grief that we feel then being one of them.
How would you, I guess it just occurred to me when you were saying that, and I realized we hadn't said this. How would you even define grief and loss? Like, what, I think everyone, if you say grief to people, like, oh, yeah, I know what you're
Right.
talking about, but like, how would you define it? That's a
Right.
tough question on the spot, but could you muster a definition for anyone listening to this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because everybody we do, and everybody who's listening has an idea of what it is, and all are valid. I think of it as a response, a sorrow, a sadness, a yearning for something or someone who is gone, who is lost
Mm.
to us. So grief is an emotion, and any emotion, there's a beginning and an end, a wave to it, right? And then the grieving process is a process over time where our grief will be there, but will change in duration and intensity. So that's how I think about grief and grieving.
And that's such a like core teaching in the yoga world, this like getting used to this idea of not identifying completely with your thoughts and emotions because you're aware that they change, like they're impermanent, which is obviously not original to yoga. That's psychology and Buddhism and all sorts of things. But when you're in a difficult part of your process, you tend not to see it. That's the challenge. I know obviously you've done some teaching for us, and I know you've done classes on this. Maybe for people listening, you could talk a little bit about what they might experience if they were participating in a yoga therapy class, seminar, set of teachings on grief and loss. Like, I could imagine someone listening to this be like, I don't even know what that would be. You know,
Right.
with a therapist, I'm going to go talk to this therapist. We're going to have a
Right.
conversation. What have you done in yoga context?
My work in yoga therapy, as I've been learning about and thinking about how to integrate yoga therapy with psychology, I feel like my work in yoga therapy is broader. And one could expect when talking with a yoga therapist, meeting with a yoga therapist around grief and loss, that there will be conversations about what has changed for the client, not just emotionally or cognitively, our thoughts, our minds, but also what has changed in our physical body, what has changed in our energy, what has changed in our thought patterns, in our minds, and what has changed in our connections to ourselves, to the person or the thing that we've lost, to other people, to our spirituality, maybe. And I feel like yoga therapy, sometimes psychology isn't like this, but yoga therapy has a way of normalizing an experience. So, like, of course, when we've lost something or something that's so relevant to our well being, there'd be an experience of grief. It's not, there's nothing wrong, right? It's a natural reaction to a loss. And so I think that on the whole, yoga therapy does a really nice job normalizing
Mhm.
someone's response to an experience like loss and seeing it as a whole person experience, not just a cognitive one, but as an experience that affects our bodies, how we feel internally, how we hold ourselves, how we experience our muscles, how we experience our breath, our energy, how we think, and again, how we connect to ourselves and the world.
It's so important because in my work, I talk to people as a yoga therapist, and they're in some sort of big grief process. And usually in my work, it's not acute, like people haven't lost a partner a month ago. It's usually people who have decided that they're going to seek some more help because things aren't going the way they want after some period of time. And the greatest hits of things I've heard are fatigue, muscle aches and pains people didn't have before. I love the way you put it, like what has changed, because people know, they're like, ever since I lost my husband or I lost my career or whatever the loss is, these things have been happening to me. And is
Mm.
there anything, that you can do or teach me to help? And that's what we do, right? We're like, we can address all these things. In addition to the deeper healing, which we also address, we can integrate things that will really work on your symptoms of grief and loss. Even if you're understanding that you're in a process, you don't necessarily want to be so fatigued you can't function or have your back and hip hurt for no reason other than the grief. So it's almost, as a yoga therapist, I'm almost like, how could you not address all these other parts of the person? And then, of course, you have all this psychological, clinical experience to add, which is amazing because people do need someone to talk to. And do you have an example of someone you've worked with that, so people listening could be like, oh, what would that really be like?
I'll share a story of a woman who is experiencing anticipatory loss. So she is the caretaker for her husband, who has early stages of Alzheimer's disease, which is a progressive neurocognitive disease. And both she and her husband are still working, and they're in their late 60s, early 70s. And she is struggling with anticipating the decline in her husband's cognitive health and what that's going to look like for her and her husband long term. So, anticipatory grief comes with a fair amount of anxiety, right? Because there's like this worry about the future. So, I asked her the very important question of what has changed since your husband's diagnosis for you. And she mentions things like, she's tensing her muscles and she'll demonstrate like this, right? And whenever there's chronically tense muscles, there's pain, right? It's not going to feel good in our bodies. And it's going to even perpetuate a low mood, anxiety, or a depressed mood, right? Even by virtue of how we hold ourselves. She talks about having difficulty managing her energy. So feeling like she has a lot of energy until a certain time in the afternoon, and then it's like depletion. She talks about the mental gymnastics that one experiences when we're anticipating a loss. Like, how can we circumnavigate this, right? How can we figure it out? And also, she's experiencing not having anybody to talk with, which is why she came to therapy, really. So I've been working with her on a couple things. First of all, how to find some shifts physically and energetically by using diaphragmatic breathing. When we breathe diaphragmatically, right, we feel our torsos expand as we inhale and then come back to center as we exhale. It's calming to the nervous system. And what's calming to the nervous system is activating the parasympathetic nervous system and is helping our physiology relax. So it's a nice way to assist her in finding some relaxation in her muscles and also assist her in regulating her breath and thereby regulating her energy.
Mm.
She's very interested in finding support groups, other people that are dealing with the same kinds of loss, the change in their spouse's physical and mental health,
Yeah,
cognitive
of
health.
course. Could feel very lonely, I'm sure.
Yes, she does feel lonely. So I'm glad that we've met and that we're working together. And she's really appreciated that question asked, that what has changed.
I could imagine if she wanted to, but regardless of her, someone in her position, we have this breathing work, which changes your nervous system, your anxiety levels, and then do some physical work, which can also do those things. And then there are the levels at which you can work on your mind, and practices in yoga that help us, we call them make your mind more sattvic, but it's basically taking the edge off your thought processes. You're not as affected by them. And these are all
Yeah.
very
And
normal things to do as like people who learn yoga, which is a lot of people, and so beneficial. I know you also ran a class on this with a group of people. What was the feedback on that, teaching them different yoga techniques for their
yeah, I was invited by my local yoga studio to do this workshop on grief and loss. So there was about 12 people that signed up that are regular students at the yoga studio. Although this workshop was something very different than the regular yoga class. And so it's a place that I also take yoga at. I attend yoga classes, and the energy in the space during the workshop was a lot different, right? Like people were having an individual experience, and it was palpable that there were things that were being addressed, change the energy in the room. And the feedback was very positive from clients that talked with me, clients that talked to the studio owner and that wanted to have it available again and have another.
Did you teach like physical breath work, meditation kind of thing?
It was a combination of the opportunity to journal around changes in each of these layers of ourselves, right? And then some brief movement or breathing or brief meditation exercises. And then the second half of the workshop was a full practice where all were integrated. So
Together.
moving with the breath, diaphragmatic breathing, meditation, a yoga nidra was a deeper, longer meditation. We did
Yeah.
some chanting, which so you mentioned having a sattvic experience.
Just
That's
good.
a good way to have a sattvic experience.
They got to experiment. And that leads us to the last thing I wanted to mention, which is that you have created a course for Breathing Deeply's new wellness platform on grief and loss, where people can do this for themselves and go through this process at their own pace and use these tools and see if it makes a shift for them. So we're really excited about that and
Oh,
offer that. And that's, I think, probably the perfect way. And that's why we're trying to do this is to engage with the work and see how you teach it and deliver it. And it's like an easy way, I think, for people to plug in. You know, you have to wait till you go on tour and come to their local yoga studio.
absolutely. Yeah. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to teach this course. I'm looking forward to people experiencing it and being available perhaps to people who want to talk some more about their experience of the course or do some additional work with the course. The wonderful thing about the course is that it's self-paced so that people can decide if they want to do a segment of it and repeat it before moving on or move on. And after the course is over, people who participate are able to do it again.
So it
So,
really matches their needs. It's not like you're demanding of them to be in a certain place in their process in any way.
and yeah, and with that, controlling the process
Hmm.
of how they move from session to session and when they move from session to session.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is super important because it's extremely individual, the grief process. You can find that at breathingdeeply.com if you're looking for it. You'll find Beth's course, among others. I really appreciate you talking with me today. And my hope is that people will watch this and come to understand that there's lots of ways they can help themselves and move through their process in a way that like leads them to the peacefulness they're really looking for. And also that, as you're hearing everything Beth said, and just our understanding that it is as normal can be to grieve. There's nothing wrong with anybody who's experiencing any set of symptoms or any experiences from grieving. At least that's how I would say it. If you have anything to add, but that's
Right.
my
I would hope that people feel that they're not alone and really know that they're not alone. Like they're having an individual experience, but they're not alone in the kind of universal sense of grieving and loving and losing. I think there can tend to be a very lonely feeling when you're grieving, especially when it's not spoken and it's not talked about. So I would hope that anybody, and including people that decide to participate in this course, would know that they're not alone.
A really lovely way to put it, that we are not alone in this experience, for sure. Thank you so much for your time today. And
Of course, Grant.
it's
Thanks
always
for
a
having
pleasure.
me.
Thank you.